Here, welcome to a Thursday edition of the Garden Report. We get the NFL draft tonight coming up here. We'll have coverage on CLNS Media. Brian Barrett's going to have coverage as well for the Ringer tonight. And I am going to take him on a break and talk some Celtics here. Celtics suffer a pretty crushing defeat in game 2 of this series, a series many people thought they would sweep. Myself not included, Brian. I expected there to be some real competition in this series just because of the opponent. We've watched it too many times. We've been surprised too many times. I think last year was the last straw for me going into a series against the Heat and saying, "Oh, it's going to be easy." It's never going to be easy against this team for whatever reason, whether it's on the Celtics, whether it's on the Heat and their coaching and their culture or whatever else you want to say on that side. This just always ends up being a battle, and maybe it'll just be a 5-game battle this time because of all the injuries and absences on that side. But they have a series here, and all Miami has to do to force a game 6 on its home court is win one game at home between game 3 and 4 here. So what they accomplished in game 2, stealing home court and hitting a million threes and just knocking the Celtics back, and that's how it felt. Just talking to them the last couple of days, like they were knocked back a little bit, kind of surprised by what the Heat did here. What was your feelings on it, and where's the series going?
Yeah, it's really disappointing because I predicted before the series that the Celtics would win in 5, and obviously I'm less confident in that after what we saw happen in game 2. I guess if you're looking at this from a silver lining perspective, you can say, hey, maybe they got the bad one out of the way and this will sort of wake up the Celtics. But I just felt like in that particular game, the thing that stuck out to me is the Heat shot the ball like crazy in the first half, and the Celtics still went into halftime with a 3-point lead.
Yep.
And it almost felt like the Celtics came out in the third quarter and they looked at it as if, well, they can't shoot like that again. And they shot like crazy and we're up 3. We're going to win this game. And there's so many things that I come out of this game and I'm concerned about. The first one would be, are they going to continue to do the same stuff that they've been doing now for 2
I think they
consecutive
are.
series? I don't understand it, man, because they surrender all these open threes. They had 23 wide open 3-point attempts where the closest defender is at least 6 feet away. And it feels like, and I know Joe after the game last night said he was okay with most of the closeouts. It's just, you would think that with all these weird numbers and we can get into them, Caleb Martin against the Celtics compared to Caleb Martin against everybody else, they're clearly comfortable with this style. And look, I understand Joe playing the numbers and it's worked for him. Like this year, the reason the Celtics are the number one offense in the NBA is because Joe did play the numbers. They take the most 3-point attempts in the NBA. They hit the most threes in the NBA, and they're second in percentage, right? So playing the numbers got them the number one offense. But right now, I feel like they didn't play the game last night. They just played the numbers. And at some point, you got to stop surrendering all these wide open threes because the Heat right now, they're very comfortable playing against the Celtics team, and something has to change. I don't understand when you have Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. Why can't you just get into these guys and play normal defense instead of saying, oh, we're okay with Highsmith hitting an open shot? Well, he was 3 of 3 on wide open threes. Tyler Hero got 6 wide open threes in the game. Caleb Martin got a bunch. He was 3 of 3. So to me, it's just something's going to change because you're going to get burned this way. And I felt like last year they got burned in a lot of the series doing the same stuff.
Yeah, that series finishes 43% 3-point shooting for the Heat, and Celtics shot in the low 30s in that one. So I don't think the Celtics will shoot that poorly through a full series this time around. But you never know, and they're playing the variance game in a dangerous way right now by letting those guys get such quality looks. And when you saw the numbers, Brian, it was shocking because, Joe said what he said after last night's game about the closeouts. And I do feel like he just had the guard up, wall up a little bit, and that just kind of slipped out because when I followed up a little bit later, he said most of them, he felt like they were actually well contested. And then you look at the numbers and it's like, no, they weren't. You had well over 20 wide open threes for the Heat in this one. And when you talk about comfort, that combined with the Heat not even hiding the fact that their game plan going into game 2 was going to be fire away. If you have even an inch of space, just launch it. I don't know how you end up so unprepared for that. Or when you see it going a certain way, don't adjust. And you're right, they had that halftime lead. So maybe that reassured them a little bit that playing the percentages and that coming down to earth would go their way in the second half. And maybe they didn't need the shooting to even go down by that much when you consider the 10-point loss here. And they certainly had offensive issues in this game too, beyond the defense. But it was just a baffling style, and it continues to concern me, the lack of attention to detail to defense here. You don't hear much from them about how they need to adjust defensively, the different ways they can play on that end, all the different weapons they have. And this, to me, it's still what frustrates me most about this Missoula era is they are, on paper, or at least with the personnel they have, a defensive team. They can be the best defense in the NBA, and they just have these lapses or casual approach or scheme that they play, and it lets guys heat up, especially usually they're giving away the mid-range, right? And so you go against a Trae Young, or last year it might have been Harden or whoever it was, who's comfortable stepping into that space and putting up floaters or shots or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, the shot that doesn't look that efficient, or you're expecting to be inefficient, ends up being a great shot for them. And for some reason or another in this series, for as much as Missoula values the three, they're just giving the Heat threes. And it does feel like deja vu a little bit to last year, where Martin's open over and over and over again. And it's not even just the shying away from him, but they're not rotating behind. They're not even getting out to these guys. And that's where I do take a little bit of the heat off Missoula and say, what are you guys doing as players? Like, it's just the effort and intensity and attention to detail on them, I think, to some degree too.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I thought there was, especially down the stretch of the game, there was a couple of times where guys just didn't get out to shooters. And that's not a Missoula thing. That's a player thing where there's got to be more of an effort there. But I just think about all the different things that have transpired with these two teams. And I think about the fact that their best ball handler is out. Their best playmaker is out in Jimmy Butler. Tyler Hero's not a good ball handler. Caleb Martin's not like this outstanding ball handler that's going to beat you off the dribble. Yet the Celtics refuse to get up in these guys. Instead, they play off them at times.
Heat. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really understand it. I mean, you would figure that this is a team that you want to put a lot of ball pressure on because they're going to turn the basketball over, considering the guys that they have on the floor. Like Duncan Robinson at one point got an easy drive to the basket. Like, this stuff should just not happen. And I just think to myself, watching this, and you say, okay, this regular season, the Heat shot 50% or better from three 5 times in 82 games. Well, the last 2 postseasons against the Celtics, it's now 4 and 9 games. When I mentioned those open threes, 6 feet is the closest defender, at least 6 feet away. On the season, Highsmith is 40%, Hero's 49.6, Martin's 39.4, Robinson is 44.4. The Heat as a team shot the second best percentage on wide open threes this season.
Wow.
So they're comfortable playing this style. Like, if you're going to give these guys wide open threes, they're going to hit them. And I just can't comprehend why they're doing this defensively. And I hope that the game plan is different going into next game. You shouldn't, I understand this whole idea because Jalen said it after the game. He talked about, it kind of reminded me of when Draymond said it in the finals about some of the Celtics. They didn't remember it was Al and Grant and there was somebody else,
White.
maybe Marcus.
I think
that's what
White,
it felt like to me. That's what it felt like to me when Jalen said that after the game. Well, it's the same thing that happened when the Warriors played the Celtics this season, and Draymond referenced Jalen's 3-point percentage. It's yeah, but that's not a wide open three. These guys are NBA players. You give them all, especially when you give them 23 attempts at it, they're going to hit a bunch of them. Now, there's going to be games where they don't, but these guys are clearly capable of doing that. And then on the flip side of things, I felt like I said on my pod after the first game, this is why Porzingis is here, right? Because against the zone, he can be a zone buster. And then against that switching scheme, he is incredible in terms of he's a mismatch nightmare. Well, he wasn't in this game. And he was, 1 of 9. He was 0 of 4 when Tyler Hero was his primary defender. Tyler Hero, who's not a good defender to begin with. And how much taller is Porzingis and Tyler Hero? 7, 8 inches? I try to think off the top of my head how tall Hero is. So that to me was something where I give Spoelstra credit. He just said, you know what, guys? We're going to switch everything, right? And we're not doubling, because in the first game, give Tatum credit. He was taking on those doubles. He had the 10 assists. Tatum was awesome. Jaylen Brown in the first game, and I would say Jaylen and Tatum both scored efficiently in isolation situations. Tatum was getting whatever he wanted. And I thought when Tatum was getting the ball at the free throw line at one point last night, hard drive right to the basket and scores right past Highsmith. With Porzingis, it was almost he was thrown off that they were actually doing it. And B, it felt like he was sort of bothered by these guys like getting underneath them a little bit. So that's their game plan. And that's part of why they won. There's two reasons they won the 3-point battle by so much. A, on the defensive end, the Celtics were conceding these wide open ones. But on the defensive end, this is Eric Spoelstra saying, we're not doing what we did in game one. Okay, if we double, that's when Hauser gets going. That's when Pritchard gets going. That's when Derek White can get going, right? That's when all our shooters can get going. But if we just play them straight up and switch, there's a chance that, hey, Tatum may go off. He did. He had 28. There's a chance that Jalen may go off. He had 33. But there's also a chance that one of the three guys, and I include Porzingis in this, one of those guys has a stinker. And then if we hit enough threes on the other end, we can find a way to win the game. So I think it's on both sides of the floor with both the offense and the defense, where the Heat had a better game plan in that situation last night. And I'm confident that Porzingis is going to bounce back, because Porzingis has been an incredible player for this team all season long. And we've seen it. Like, the reason he's the most efficient post-up scorer in the NBA is because he does it against smaller guys, right? It's not like, I can't remember one time where Porzingis is actually posting up, say, Joel Embiid, right? Or Brook Lopez. He's not posting up centers. He's posting up smaller defenders that the Celtics dictate those matchups. So I just feel like, from an offensive perspective, this is an easier thing to figure out. It's the defense, to me, that I just hope there's some sort of adjustment, and just the necessary effort is there as well.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I do worry a little bit that Joe is going to double down on the offensive response here and what they need to do on that end. And they do need to fix things, certainly, on that end. It was a mess in this game. I know the shooting percentages, as we look below here, on terrible. They missed a bunch of free throws. So the turnovers, the shot totals that they put up, especially from the 3-point line, and Porzingis' night in particular, were all problems here. And even just, as you mentioned with Hero, taking advantage of mismatches. And that's something they've struggled to do against this team in the past, just because of the way I think the Heat mix up their looks or try to hide guys. I think they're pretty flexible defensively in ways that make it difficult to highlight those mismatches. And that's something Porzingis talked about today. And even that Bam matchup for him, just straight up, is a difficult one, because he's probably more often than not going to have to just space him out if that's who's guarding him. And if they do throw a Jovic on Porzingis, or someone like that, he has to be brutally efficient, and they're just going to try to hammer that matchup over and over and over again. I think that's a trap the Celtics fell into a little bit in this game. And then the Heat have a guy flying over, and they're laying bodies on him, and they weren't afraid to foul in this game either. The Heat weren't. So they played with a real physicality and aggression against Porzingis, but also said, go beat Hero, go beat Jovic. And if that's a space they're going to live in and be comfortable with, that's going to be a problem for the Celtics offense, because that Porzingis pick and roll has been so foundational to their offense this year. And if we look back at some of Porzingis' rougher games and their rougher games this year, I think back to the Denver one, where Denver just put Aaron Gordon on Porzingis, and they lived with that. And Jokic was able to roam around and kind of try to guard Holiday and some of these other guys and just stay in the lane there. So that's when the spacing is going to get bad. I felt like Tatum had a decent game here, but they turned him into a shooter more than a passer, and he ends up going from 10 assists to 3 assists. And that's where you mentioned the Hausers and Pritchards of the world, not able to get those guys going as much. I mean, Pritchard didn't even have a shot in this game. So listen, I have just as many issues as many do about Joe turning the attention toward the offense when the defense had as many issues in this game as it did. But I do think they need to fix that end probably just as much as some of the defensive issues we saw here. And it's a little concerning, because there are so many guys you can go at on that Heat side. Robinson, Hero. You shouldn't shoot 2 for 14 against Hero, whatever it is. And that again is on the players.
Well, and the other thing I'd say too is we got a flashback of previous seasons where the Celtics couldn't function with Tatum off the court.
Right.
And look, it's a very small sample size, but the 7 minutes that he was on the bench, they had a 33.3 offensive rating. Not a 93.3, which would be atrocious. Not an 83.3, which would be horrible. A 33.3 offensive rating. They were outscored by 16 points in the 7 minutes he sat. They outscored the Heat by 6 points when he was on the court. So that's something that needs to be fixed as well. And I do feel like there's one thing offensively that I didn't understand why they weren't going to. I don't understand why Derek White wasn't more involved last night. It felt like, what did he finish with, 5 shot attempts? And it feels like at the end of the game, they started doing some stuff for White and he was getting some opportunities. It's just like, I feel like they have to play through Derek White a little bit more. The one thing I will say, I just praised Tatum there, but the one thing I will say about Tatum is, Bobby, to me, and I don't know if you disagree with this, but when he gets these mismatches, it could, quite frankly, right now against this Heat team when they don't have Jimmy Butler, everybody they put on him is a mismatch. Sometimes he just has to go. It's like he waits too long, right? And the rest of the defense is setting up behind him, right? So it's like if he gets the ball on the wing, just go. It's almost like he has to, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's like he sizes the guy up a little bit too much. And a lot of these times it's like, you can just drive by the defender, whoever it is, whether it's Caleb Martin, whoever's on him at that particular point, especially if it's Jaquez, who he destroyed in the first game of the series, as did Jalen. That would be my one critique on Tatum. It just feels like at times I just like him to go faster when he gets those switches. But getting back to Porzingis, if they do this, if they say, hey, we're gonna switch everything, that's sort of the whole idea. And the big thing that I took away from the first game the Celtics played against the Heat this season is like, oh, they're not going to be able to switch Bam onto everybody. But until Porzingis actually burns them like he did in the first game, well, they're just going to switch everything. And if I'm the Heat, that's what I do the remainder of the series. I don't think it's worth playing a zone because at this point, the Celtics have functioned much better against zone this year than they have in previous seasons. And the shooting is ridiculous. I mean, they have so many spacers that they can put on the floor. So I would expect this to be, now the Celtics are going to have to prove they can beat this style of defense again, like we've seen in years past. And hopefully Porzingis can be that guy. And I thought in last night's game, I would have closed with Al, because Al is, and I'm not saying he was great last night, but he's a better defender on Bam to begin with. Like, he's just a better matchup than Porzingis is. So if Porzingis isn't providing the offense, it would make sense to put Al out there. But I also do wonder about this. Like, that's a big move to make if you're Missoula, right? If you're saying, hey, Kristaps, you're going to be on the bench for the final 5 minutes. With Al, it's a little bit easier, right? Because he's a veteran. He's been coming off the bench all season long. So I do think that was probably more of a personality decision than it was actually a basketball decision. And look, maybe they just thought Porzingis was going to get it together down the stretch of the game. I just felt like there was something wrong with him the entire night.
Yeah, and this is so frustrating. I'm trying not to put too much on Joe because I think it's so easy to go at him when they lose and blame him for everything. But yeah, those kind of decisions become so crucial this time of year. If you see a guy doesn't have it, you go back to some of the White, Malcolm, Marcus stuff from last year and how big of an issue that became. The defensive attention to detail here. It reminded me of last year when they fell to 10th out of 16 playoff teams in defense after a pretty solid regular season. And I liked their defense for most of this year and some of the layers and wrinkles they added into it. And of course, Drew Holiday's addition making all the difference in the world there. But then to have this kind of performance so early in the playoffs, a letdown like this, you just wanted to get out of this series and feel like it's different Celtics team than it's been in the past, a greater level of consistency, not the same lapses or just sleepwalking that we've seen in different spots. And all of a sudden you're hearing again after this game, you got to show up and play with more energy. And it's like, oh my God, it was like 3 seasons in a row of this. And so maybe it's just a blip. Maybe this is just a crazy shooting night for Miami and you don't see it again and they take care of this in 5 and we'll forget this game ever happened. And again, I don't think it was wise to go into this series and expect a sweep. I mean, they happen so rarely in the NBA now in general, never mind against this team. So I do side with them a little bit on this not being a panic moment for the Celtics certainly here. Right. But when you go through a year and just dominate everyone the way you did and show to be this much of a problem for opposing competition and you're a 15-point favorite in all these games, and what were they last night to win the series, like minus 50,000 or something like that?
Yeah,
it's tough to come out of a game 2 and just be this patently outplayed.
Yeah, well, and some of the stuff too that sort of annoys you about this game, and I'm with you, they'll probably bounce back and win this series in 5 games, and they're the far superior team in terms of the talent. They'll probably win it relatively easily, but it's in the back of your head for the remainder of the postseason, right? Where we've seen in the past the Celtics can sort of have these stinkers, but I felt like they didn't go to a lot of the pet plays that have worked for them this year, where that inverted pick and roll when Drew or Derek White sets a screen for Tatum and those guys are the rollers. They're really good at making plays out of that. I get they're switching everything, but okay, then you can have Tatum as the screener and Tatum has a mismatch on him, right? So I just feel like they got to go to that stuff, be more methodical with the offense. It does almost feel like, and look, I don't know exactly what everybody's thinking when they're playing, obviously on the court, but it did kind of have a feel of they just thought they were going to win. They just felt like they were going to win this game, and out of all teams to sort of have that attitude against, that's why I actually argued that the Heat actually may be a good matchup for the Celtics because it's going to get them right into the postseason. Where if you go back to last year, the Hawks series, there was a couple games they just really they didn't pay attention to detail defensively and they made mistakes and the Hawks Trey Young went nuts and all this. And it just felt like to me, it would be different this year because they've had all these losses piled up over the years and they realize how important it is to get to the finish line healthy. Like if we think back to that Miami series last year, unbelievable that they came back from a 3-0 hole. And I still contend that Tatum, if he doesn't turn his ankle, they win that game because Tatum was awesome in 4, 5, and 6. But guess what? You dug yourself that hole. And then in game 7, your best player is dealing with an injury. So you would think that you just want to get through these series as quickly as you can. And again, it feels like the Celtics have had this tendency over the years to play with their food. And it felt like last night was another example of them playing with their food. And the other thing I would say is this. I watched that Lakers Nuggets game on, what was that, Tuesday now? And the Lakers were up big. And then Denver makes an adjustment, right? Where they say, hey, actually, you know what? We're going to put Aaron Gordon on Anthony Davis because they were going at Jokic and Jokic was having to do all this stuff defensively. And that ended up working for them, right? Because LeBron was basically just calling Anthony Davis up every time and they were getting the mismatch they wanted on Jokic. So Denver made an adjustment. Then they started to get back in the game and you felt like, oh, this is what Denver does. They made one little change and they were going to win the game. I never felt like in that third quarter because the Heat came out and what was it, a 22-9 run to start the third. I never felt like in the third quarter at the end where the Celtics made that little run or in the fourth quarter, I never felt like the Celtics are going to win the game. And that level of inevitability that Denver has, the Celtics, quite frankly, they just don't have it right now. Or like going back to Brady, when he got the ball at the end of the game, he felt like Tom was going to win. And I just had like the Celtics going to win a bunch of games so they blow teams out, right, throughout this postseason run where they win by double digits. And you may be able to win a championship that way. But it's these games that they fall behind and you just don't feel like they're going to come back. I had that same feeling last night that I've had so many other times in the postseason with this group before. And I sort of thought that was past them. Look, and maybe this will just be a wake-up call, but that was – and I know I've harped on this, but that was very disappointing to me. And, you know, it's so crazy because you're watching – both games. You go from you're so pumped up, you're so pissed that the Celtics lose, and then it's like the Bruins win. So it's like this crazy range of emotion. But the Boston parlay yesterday, you could have taken the Red Sox, the Bruins, and the Celtics. The one team that lost is the Celtics. I mean, it's just insane.
Especially to be that big of a favorite. And again, I didn't expect them to dominate this series, even with Butler down and all that, because you just know the coaching on the other side, the compete on the other side is that level. And you probably could have seen it coming in game 1. And I did harp on those runs Miami went on in that game a little bit to say, even you go up 30 in that game, you can't just stop playing because they're not going to stop in any of these games at any point in this series. If it gets to 3-1, let's say, they're still going to come out in a game 5 and play their ass off. And so it is a good ramp up in that sense, like you said, Brian, to get into the playoffs, to take things seriously and know that if you don't, you're going to lose like this. You're not that much better than the rest of the field here. And I think they have enough of a talent advantage to get through the East. We'll see what happens and who comes out of the West. I still feel that way, but this just jars you a little bit and reminds you of some of the past letdowns. And you did feel good about some of these other Celtics teams in the past, similar to this one, and then got surprised at how differently the playoff went compared to the regular season. But I still think it's a little too early to judge them to that degree here. I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor here, Prize Picks. Go check them out. Use the code CLNS. You get a 100% deposit match up to $100. You just pick 2 to 6 players, build your daily fantasy sports team, and you're off. It's great for the playoffs here. Check guys' points, rebounds, assists, totals that they're predicted to get, and just pick more or pick less on your guys. And it's that easy. You'll be off to the races. Just use the code CLNS to support the Garden Report and CLNS Media when you head over there. prizepicks.com/CLNS. One guy I think that needs mentioning here, who I thought was just fantastic in this game and hasn't been in this matchup in the past, is Bam. The aggression he played with, the imprint he puts on the game defensively is a big deal here, and we've seen it in the past. He can play so many different roles defensively against them. And when he starts on Tatum, like he did at different points in this game, that can give the offense just a little bit of pause. Like, where are we trying to send him? Where are the matchups here? And they can change that play after play. And when we talk about adjustments, it's not just the coach and game the game, it's the players being able to show so many different looks. And just like the Celtics are able to do that on offense and on defense to some degree, the Heat just constantly shift shapes on defense. And you mentioned it, zone not as much of an option this time around, but the switching just flattens you out. And I know you wanted to see Horford to close this game, but I do understand why they went to Porzingis late, because you had to have a guy who could beat some switching out there. And the tough thing with Al at this point of his career is you can just switch him and know that he's not going to
Yeah.
beat you on a seal or on a post up or something like that. So you can just sort of take away his 3-point game by switching aggressively. And it does bring me back. Like I said, I don't want to harp on Joe here, but there were different games during the regular season where they faced a high level switching team, Nuggets, Clippers, a couple others, and they had issues. And I remember at one point, Joe said, no concerns at all going against it. We're good. And to end up in this spot and be like, yeah, the switching really threw us off. It's tough to hear because they showed that level of confidence, they showed that level of growth during the year against defenses like that, and just to be totally thrown off and, some of the comments today about how difficult it is to solve that kind of stuff. It just doesn't sound great, and it doesn't look great on Joe. It really doesn't. For them to be that perplexed and that overwhelmed by just some coaching adjustments and scheme adjustments on the other side. And I do believe the Heat a little bit because, you'll ask Spoelstra and you'll ask their players about the schemes and the zone and all that different kind of stuff. And whether it's just to kind of cover themselves up or not get into the weeds, they always say, listen, it's not about the scheme. It's not about any tricks we're doing out there. It's about being ready to know this is going to be really difficult and making as intense of an effort at whatever we're doing as possible. And you do see that playing out a little bit on the court. Like they are just going offense. Guys are flying around defense. Guys are making the rotations behind some of the pressure they're putting on the ball, whatever it might be. So they do play with a level of intensity and physicality and just assertiveness in what they're doing that, yes, the Celtics have all the talent advantages and all the different things we talk about here, but you have to do that stuff too, or that stuff for the Heat can end up being a real advantage for them.
Well, yeah, and even if you look at this game last night, the Celtics didn't crash the boards at all. They've made an emphasis this year, especially from the corners, to crash, and we didn't really see this. I don't know if part of that was the switching scheme, but going back to that is you have players that should be good enough at this point in their careers to torch that scheme because of who's out there, right? Like you mentioned the Clippers, they have Kawhi, and I know Kawhi's banged up right now, but at that point they have Kawhi, they have Paul George, right? And then you think about the Nuggets, they have great defenders like KCP and Aaron Gordon. And you look at this Heat team outside of Bam, in terms of the guys they put out there in the starting lineup, who's a great defender? Like from a one-on-one perspective, you should be able to score on all these guys if you're Tatum and you're Jalen, and they did for the most part. But to me, like this team is not nearly talented enough to be able to stop the Celtics the way that they are. That's why I feel like you got to take advantage of some of the other matchups too, like Derek White, as I alluded to earlier. I mean, I feel like I come away from every loss that the Celtics have and I say, hey, there should be more Derek White because he seems to make the correct play every time. And then on the flip side of that, I do wonder how they're going to defend Bam going forward. No, now look, part of it last night is Bam he was hitting everything from the mid range, right? He's got that little push shot that he's really good at. But I do wonder, like, I don't love the Porzingis matchup there. I really don't. Like when
He gets
Porzingis
into
has,
foul trouble too.
yeah, so I do wonder if they take one of the wings, either Tatum or Brown, and have them go one-on-one with Bam, because Bam is an unbelievable player. He's not like somebody that is going to torch them with his size down low. And Jalen and Tatum are both sturdy enough to bang with Bam if they need to. So I wonder what adjustments they make on that end of the floor. Or maybe they don't make any adjustments at all, and we just see the Heat take a bunch of open threes and they play the variance game. I just feel like that's a recipe for a disaster, playing the variance game, because we've seen it in the NBA playoffs. We've seen teams, they can just get red hot, and I just wouldn't count on that throughout the entirety of a series. I don't feel like playing the numbers is the right way to approach this Heat team. So I hope that game 3, this team comes out with a different fire defensively. And I would even say the two guys they got for this matchup, right, in terms of Porzingis and Drew, I thought Drew was atrocious in this game. He
He
was
was
not good
awful.
offense. Yeah, and defensively, I don't know what he was doing. It's like he was almost like asleep out there at times. I don't know. The whole effort on the defensive end, top to bottom, was bad. And Drew's too on offense. He makes some of these passes that you scratch your head like, what was he looking at? And then there was a play in this game where he gets I believe it was Hero, gets a block at the top of the key, and then he just dribbles up the court and takes a contested three from the left wing.
Immediately.
Yeah, and it's like, dude, I understand he shot the three ball tremendously well this season, but those weren't contested. Like, the reason he was so good is because he's shooting all these wide open threes in the corner, and it was coming off ball movement. Sometimes he will do this, like, and his pull up numbers are fine and all, they're good. But that to me was just, that was rush. You make this huge play defensively, and then you do that. To me, it just, and then there was one point in the game where Porzingis pulled one from the logo. And look, I know that Porzingis, the depth on his threes, it's like one of the deepest. I believe it's one of the deepest in the league. It's like, what is it, like 27 feet or
he's
whatever?
always far behind the line.
Yeah, but those are usually from the wing, right? And that's like from ball movement. This was like in transition. I can't remember if it was Tatum or Jay. It could have been Derek White. I forget who passed it to him, but he caught the ball basically at the logo and threw one up. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, Drew had some real lapses in this game. The ball ended up in his hands a ton. And I wonder why that is, especially when Derek didn't have it as much. And that was flipped throughout the year. Holiday ended up being screening and spacing kind of guy, and White ended up being much more involved in this offense. And I do think you missed that. You missed that early in game one, too. It took him a little while to get going in that
Yeah,
opening game of this series, too. So those are all pretty valid there. And you just didn't get enough performances up and down the lineup here when Porzingis struggles like that. Jalen, fine offensively. He had that great stretch in the halftime, but defensively, one of those games where he's just lost too often. And it looked like one of the old Jalen games from a year or two ago where he just didn't impact the game enough against a lot of movement and switching and communication needed kind of defensive stretches out there. And I think a lot of those lapses that didn't end in contests ended up with him in that action. So you do wonder, as you try to assess some offensive adjustments here, you're looking at probably getting more threes up. You're looking at doing all these different kind of things on offense. But like you mentioned, maybe you do go to a wing on a Bam just to try to position Jalen on one matchup where I always feel like he's been at his best. And he's taken on a bigger guy there and maybe a matchup that's a little more difficult for him, but at least he can then just lock in on that. And if they want to screen him out of that, he can end up on a ball handler and you feel good about him in that spot. I just feel like some kind of adjustment, schematic adjustment like that defensively is necessary here, but I don't think that's how Joe looks at it. I think he looks at it as they didn't do enough on offense. They certainly turned the ball over too much here and probably didn't get the kind of shots they wanted in this game. But I do think if you just suffocate the Heat's offense, and it shouldn't be that hard to do. I mean, what are they, 27th or something like that with Jimmy off the floor this year? They're in the low
oh,
20s in
horrible.
terms of their efficiency with him off the floor. So I know it won't look pretty and it's not their style, but they can grind out this series on defense and should be able to
Yeah,
win all these games by doing that alone, even if you don't shoot great, even if you don't execute offensively the way you want to. And all the players were saying it last night too. Like the Heat were hitting too many threes. We couldn't get out on the run because we weren't getting any stops. And that ended up hurting the offense too. And I think Joe talks a lot about how your execution on offense sets up your defense, but it goes the other way too, where if you're piling up stops and forcing turnovers, that can flow into offense too. And it's just sometimes, and he admitted it going into this year, I feel like he doesn't pay enough attention to the X's and O's of defense and how much you have to scheme and draw up stuff on that end and adjust on that end too. And I think he just looks at it simply as let's give up the mid range. Let's give up threes to poor 3-point shooters. Let's take away the efficient shots from these guys, take away the rim. They play a ton of drop, and that'll all level out. And sometimes in a series, it just doesn't because it's 5, 6, 7 games.
yeah. Sometimes you have a team that can beat you, and when doing that, and we've seen the Heat do it last season. Literally, just happened to the Celtics last year. There's a reason this team is very comfortable playing you because they know what to expect. That they're going to get these open threes. That's why I think a guy like Caleb Martin is so comfortable in this matchup because he's had a ton of success against the Celtics. And if they're going to leave him open, he's going to hit shots. The other thing too is just, and I know Drew's plus minus looked really good in the game last night when most guys didn't, and Pritchard didn't. I don't think Pritchard did. He take a shot? No, he didn't take a
He had
shot.
0 shots.
Yeah, But this is my thing I would say is out of the starting five, I don't think Drew needs to be playing 37 minutes. Pritchard only played 20 minutes in this game, and I feel like in these type of games, Pritchard, and I've heard JJ Redick say this in the past, he does change the game when he comes in. And I do wonder at Drew's age, and I know they just signed him to the extension, and this isn't me disliking Drew. Drew is a phenomenal player. I love all the things they can do with him defensively. But sometimes fatigue can lead to mistakes. And he's a little bit older, of course, now. He's an older player. And I just think when you have a guy like Peyton Pritchard, especially down the stretch, he was awesome for this team. I thought he was awesome in game one. I think that you can play him more minutes than you played him in that game. I think sometimes they lean into leaving Drew out there a little bit too long. And I do also believe that at times you got to, not to say that you're going to change the starting group, but I'm not so sure the starting group is actually your best lineup all the time, right? Like there's a reason that you have these three reserves that you're playing, and at
I
times I
love
just
the Al Porzingis lineup. I wanted to see
yeah,
more of that last night just for the defense and the size and, like you said, getting more offensive rebounds maybe. I think that's been a great unit for them this year, and you can swap in Horford for Holiday in that case and still get ball handling, still get switchability and good decision making and all of that, and shooting, of course, as well. So I know Luke Kornet's absence has probably played into a little bit of not being able to do that as much here, and they'd make that Tillman addition, and I just don't know if he's gonna be part of this playoff run. I don't know if he built enough trust in that time to end the regular season there, but Joe did say going into the playoffs, we have to use our bench just like we did in the regular season because they did a lot of stuff for us, and so far through 2 games, I thought they were used incredibly effectively in game 1, but you didn't get enough out of them in game 2, and obviously Cornette's been hurt, and Tillman is a DNP in a couple of these different games, and, down the line there, you're probably not going any deeper than that. But I do feel like some experimenting with lineups and getting different guys in the mix isn't the worst idea for a round one series, especially one here where you feel like you're going to win. But this is, again with Joe here, is he going to be back into the mode of I got to play the starters a ton here because the stakes are so high and, I can't make any mistakes here or, have any slip ups and you're going to have them anyway. So you might as well try some stuff.
yeah. And the thing that I would say too in terms of lineups is when Tatum's not on the floor, you could just be like Tom Thibodeau and play him 48 minutes like you played Josh Hart, but you don't want to do that this early in the postseason. But when
Right.
Tatum sits, I would actually take Drew out of the game too, because Drew tends to play slow, just like Tatum doesn't play super fast, right? And if you think
No.
about this trio, the three guys on this team that actually will play fast, Peyton Pritchard, Derek White, and Jalen. When those three guys are on the floor together, it feels like at times you get a rebound, and Derek White is great with the hit-ahead passes. Pritchard is just going to push the ball in transition, and Jalen over the past 2 seasons has been one of the best transition players in the NBA. Actually, post All-Star break, he averaged the most fast break points in the NBA. So playing Jalen with those two guys, I think it would sort of speed up your offense a little bit and force you to play faster. And even if you want to put another shooter out there too, Hauser, I know you'd be small defensively, but if you want to keep a guy like Al out there, I just think that lineup, that trio, when Tatum goes to the bench, I would have those three guys on the court together. So like you don't even have to say anything to those guys. When those guys are on the court together, the mission's simple. They know they're going to play fast because that's how they play. And so like when I don't love when Tatum's off the court and then Derek White and Drew are on the court together. I rather that be Pritchard with Derek White because I know they're going to push. Look, and there's not like defensive matchups on the flip side you're worried about with Pritchard with this team, right? Like there's nobody you're scared of that Pritchard's going to have to match up against, and they're not going to like
No, and he was
hunt.
pretty good in isolation this year when you look at the
Yeah,
numbers.
right. So, and like, remember last year, game one, everyone went nuts because Joe put Pritchard on the court when Jimmy was out there. It's like, okay, it's Jimmy Butler. Like, LeBron would do the same thing. He's going to call him up, but they don't have anybody like that. So I would lean into Pritchard more, and I really would try to play faster too. I know they mentioned they didn't really get out in transition, but they do certainly have to play faster in this series too. Just get some easy buckets, right? Because they really didn't get a lot of easy baskets yesterday.
Yeah, too slow, way too slow last game, and that is a product of not getting enough stops and Tatum and some of the bad habits there in their offense that creep up every now and then. And I do like the Pritchard idea, and his development late in the year was such a big story because you went from a guy who would have a great game every now and then, but didn't play consistently, and you didn't know if he was a playoff guy. He was so consistent late in the year. He showed such obvious growth and confidence, and he had that great game one too to break out into this postseason. To see him have no shots and not involved to this degree just isn't right because let's say it's a year ago with Malcolm. If Malcolm had that kind of game, you'd be like, what are they doing? And Pritchard's effectively in that Malcolm role now, and he had some Malcolm-like production this year in that spot. I think he took over that role effectively for at least the late stages of the season. So I don't think it's crazy at all to say he should be out there with the starters a ton, playing some extra minutes if another guy doesn't have it, like Holiday clearly didn't in this last game. And just like you probably got a little stagnant going at matchups in this last game, the Heat might do that if Pritchard's out there, and I know that's been a conversation with Hauser in the past too, is just teams are gonna try to go at those guys so aggressively, that maybe they end up out of their offense or out of their flow or out of their rhythm, and if you're able to hold up against that, that can be a great way to make the other team go stagnant, and the Heat are gonna go stagnant. I mean, they are very inconsistent offense. They have too many guys who are so erratic from the field, and they'll have those 4 or 5 minute stretches where they just don't do anything. And you have to build big leads off those. And they did in game one. They weren't able to find those opportunities in game two now. So what are you expecting down in Miami, Brian, as they head on the road for 2 games here? Because a split would be more nerves and bad news for the Celtics, certainly. And you're hoping that they can go down there and just take care of business. It's not a very daunting environment down there. But a road game's a road game in the playoffs.
Yeah, one thing real quick before I answer that is it's a great point on Pritchard because like down the stretch of the season, there wasn't a lot to like look forward to in these games. And Pritchard getting that opportunity playing all those minutes, I thought that was huge. And I thought that was beneficial entering the postseason. And it felt that way after game one. But I expect the Celtics to come out flying in game three. And I think they're going to win this game relatively comfortably. Game four is the one that I have the question about on Monday night because I do truly believe they're going to bounce back. This team has shown a lot of character. How many times they lose back-to-back games this year when they actually had their team? I mean, do you have to go back to Philly, Minnesota at the beginning of the season? Was there another time Atlanta maybe? Yeah, they lost to Atlanta
Yeah,
back to. But
they
even
had
that
some
was
guys
kind of
missing in
weird,
those
right?
ones too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of a weird situation. So they've shown the ability to bounce back. So I do think they'll win this game convincingly to game three. Game four is the one where I'm like, I think this is going to be one where they have to play a close game and prove that they can win it. I know people reference the clutch numbers all the time, that it's been good, but we've seen at times the clutch offense has not been great in certain games
That
this
could have been
season.
another layer to this game too if it did
Oh,
get
yeah.
close late.
Yeah, no, you're not kidding. I think about it too. Like there was plenty of games where they got good shots late. Like I think about the Denver loss at the Garden where KCP is on Tatum and Tatum just went a little bit too quickly, right? Like I think that since he didn't catch it cleanly, he thought that he didn't have enough time. So there's been times that they've taken good shots down the stretch. I don't want to make it sound like I have a huge issue with their clutch offense. I think at times they played too slowly, but I do think that we'll see the Heat put up a real fight on Monday. I think the Celtics win this game, hopefully going away on Saturday where they win it comfortably.
No doubt. It was a real wake-up call for them, and they looked a little bit taken aback by what happened there from Joe on all the way down there. And I think they all know that they need to be able to adjust a little bit more quickly on the fly there. And it wasn't all Joe. I thought the players played pretty poorly across the board in the game and executed poorly as well. So you got to put it on them. I mean, if they're ready to win, you have to be ready to perform in a first-round series against a team that's this demoralized and be able to execute a game plan and adjust on a game plan if you have to. And they weren't able to do either of those, and it was disappointing to have this kind of game this early in the run here. But no one would be surprised if they win in 5. It's certainly that type of series here, that kind of opponent. So it'll be interesting to see just how they look coming out in game 3, game 4, especially as you mentioned, Brian, there. We'll have coverage of all that here on CLNS Media, live from Miami as well. I'm heading down Saturday to catch those games, which I'm very excited about. And
Nice.
great sponsors here. Obviously, big reasons we're able to do that. Check out PXG for great golf apparel this spring into summer. Certainly, if you're going down to Miami, you're going to want some great polos, hats, tees, all the rest over there for men and women. Just go to pxg.com/Garden Report. Use that code Garden Report to check out and save 10% on all apparel over there. And check out Nutrafol as well. Get $10 off your first month subscription. Get ahead on hair loss with Nutrafol.com/men. Use the code GARDEN over there to get first month subscription, $10 off, as well as free shipping at Nutrafol.com/men. He's Brian Barrett. You're going to have some draft coverage tonight for us, right? On the
For
podcast.
sure, man. For sure. I'm just hoping that the inevitable happens, that they take Drake May, that they don't do anything stupid here. They don't overthink it. They just make the obvious choice. And I hope it's Drake May. We need some hope with this Patriots organization, right? I'm complaining about the Celtics, but the Patriots, we really need some help with that organization. So hopefully they land on Drake May and we actually have a reason to be optimistic about the Patriots going forward, because the ownership group right now does not provide a lot of reasons to be confident about the organization. So we'll see.
No, it's amazing how bad of a position they're in right now, and they can turn around with a great pick here. That's kind of how that goes. So it is a big night. Red Sox certainly not giving us already a ton to be excited about, and their season seems to be falling apart by the time May even comes around here. So tough spots for those teams. Luckily, Celtics, Bruins, in the midst of what look like could be some pretty good playoff runs here. So check out Brian Barrett's Off the Pike podcast for more coverage of them. Check out our Patriots channel tonight over here. Taylor Kyles and the rest of the crew there are going to have a ton of coverage tonight, live reaction, I'm sure, as well. I'm sure John will be jumping in as well to give some reaction here. They're over at Patriots Press Pass, so subscribe over there. That draft's coming up in just about 90 minutes now, so be ready, be subscribed, have the notifications on over there. Thanks for stopping by, Brian. I'm sure we'll talk later this postseason.
Thanks for having me, man. Enjoy Miami.